Hey guys, I'm Doug.
And I'm Theo, I'm a physical therapist.
And today you're gonna watch Theo play with my feet.
So the reason we're doing that is to try to tackle some of the injuries we see from running, any kind of high demand, high impact activity. Try to get ahead of it, see with him specifically if he has any issues going on, but more specifically try to help yourself prevent potential injury that could decrease your performance. So when we're talking about lower body injuries, tendon specific, we want to make sure we rule out a few outliers that could be medical emergencies. And specifically in the lower body, lower extremity, there is a condition we call compartment syndrome. And what happens if you're training with your volume that's exceeding your body's ability to recover these compartments, which hold muscles and tendons and vessels and nerves, they can individually become swollen and compress those tissues. So most commonly, this compartment here in the front will be the culprit. And what the person might say is, or what the athlete might report is that when they run, if they hit a specific point, or if they're rucking and they hit a specific mile, or they're just moving in any kind of gear at a very specific point, they'll notice that this area becomes very tight. It becomes heavy, full. And if that's also accompanied with numbness into the entire foot, or an inability to pull or lift the foot up, then that's a serious sign that there's some swelling and inflammation that's building up. So if that's the case, that's a medical emergency. You want to make sure that you stop the activity. If it lingers, if you notice discoloration, absolutely go get that checked out, ER. But do not put compression on it. Do not have aggressive soft tissue work. You're trying to calm this down. You don't want to increase circulation. So that being said, if we're dealing with more commonly some pain and tenderness along the inside here, one of those terms that we hear a lot of, but it's not specific enough, you hear shin splints. And shin splinting could be along the front, it could be along the side. Most commonly it's along the side here. And when somebody comes in and they're reporting pain, what I immediately am thinking of is, what's the activity, the volume of their running? Most commonly the posterior tib muscle, which is supporting the foot, gets overstretched and just overworked and becomes strained up through the inside of the leg. So what we can do is to treat whether the tendon is the issue or just the muscle's overworked, we're not going to directly stretch the tendon. We're going to try to work on the muscle. So if he crosses his leg, he can grab a lacrosse ball and he's going to use the opposite arm. He's just going to palm the ball and direct the pressure straight into that spot and just tilt the ball back and forth and just work his way down. And what he'll find is some areas might feel a little more tender than the rest. So at that point, he's going to not hold his breath. He's going to continue to supply oxygen to those tissues, but he's going to pump his foot up and down. And then he's just going to try not to throw up. Good. And then he'd move on to the next spot. Now, if he didn't have a lacrosse ball, he could use his hand. If he takes his thumb, protecting his thumb, not getting himself in a position where he causes any joint stress to the thumb, he's going to cup his thumb with his hand. So he's going to just kind of cup this thumb there, and then he can guide that thumb all the way up the inside. But what he would do is he'd actually apply a little bit of cocoa butter, coconut oil, maybe some glitter, but work along that shin in the same way he did with the ball to just work that tissue out and give it some circulation. This is an area, I mean, I can feel when he's walking around, he probably doesn't feel this until he actually spends a little bit of time working on his lower body. So yeah, definitely this area here, he's got something going on. So I would want him to work on that.
I have a history of shin splints.
Yeah.
This is great.
There it is. So this will help. He'll stand up, walk around, feel a little lighter, feel a little better. If he has access to cupping, cupping is another treatment, which it's decompressive. So you're actually lifting the tissue. You can increase circulation to those areas, and running a few cups along the shin after he would work on the cross ball or his hand. And then he can do the same thing. He can hang out for a few minutes with the cups on, and then he can pump the foot up and down, working through letting those tissues stretch. So really easy to implement by themselves. It's not a treatment. It's something that you would do in addition to other forms of treatment, but it just helps your body create an environment for a perfusion, which is essentially blood flow. So whenever we talk about tissues being injured in the lower leg, what we need to look at first is what's going on with the joint position and the alignment. Because sometimes we're treating an area that's just, it's overworked because of an improper position that we're forcing our body into. So if Doug's standing here and his feet are even slightly turned out, he's already allowing this area of his foot to collapse. It's sending a signal to maybe let his knee drift a little, and he's turning off some of the stabilizers in his hip. So if he's standing still and he's not able to keep his foot straight without some kind of pain in the hip, in the knee, that could be something that needs to be checked out. If he stands and just notices when his feet are straight, if he feels like he's turning his feet in, then we know that we just have an adaptation that we need to break. Because whether he's running, walking, standing still, if he's moving forward, his feet should be forward. And the reason for that is now it's an equal position. There's neutral position of each joint to allow the muscles to fire. This will change when you squat, but if you're running or if you're performing an activity where you are moving forward, you don't want to see the feet start to turn out. And if he exaggerates it, turns his feet out excessively, he automatically is going to start to feel the feet collapse. This gets overstretched. This compresses. The toes will start to drift. So what I try to figure out is, can he naturally get his toe back into position, or is it stuck there? Because sometimes if it's stuck, then we're dealing with a real big issue, because this toe right here is 90% of your push off. And if you cannot keep it in that neutral position, then we know we're going to be losing force as we try to drive off the ground or stabilize if we're moving weight, such as a squat. And then your pinky toe lets you know if your furniture at home is in the right place. So a lot of the rigid shoes and the compressive, restrictive shoes, it's the same as if we wrapped our hand in duct tape and stuffed it in a mitten. We would end up seeing a lot of hand issues. If he puts his feet forward, what he can do is kind of get an idea of where his feet stand. And if he notices there's some drifting, but he's able to get his toe back, he can wear these correctives, which is the same reason you see some of the toe socks are more popular now. But if you wear these at night, if you wear these throughout the day, if you know you're just going to be sitting around, what these do, they stretch the little muscles in your feet. So they're allowing adequate nutrition and circulation to those muscles so that they can actually fire the way they should. So they're called intrinsics, but they're just tiny little muscles in your feet. And the best way to do it is if you can try to wear them at night, you'll notice a huge difference when you wake up. If you don't feel like you can find these, or if it's hard to stomach the price, because some of these can be expensive, most grocery stores will have the foam toe spreaders. You can wear those and see if they're tolerable. They can be a little aggressive. On top of that, if he felt he wanted to try a little bit more, he could cross his foot, try to fit his fingers in between his toes, and then pumping his toes up and down, he can get a similar stretch. That's really easy to do. End of a long day, especially if you've done anything with gear, kit, any kind of external load, the feet take a beating. So getting the fingers into the toe space to stretch the toes. We talk about treatment. The lacrosse ball, one of the easiest things you can do to try to clean up some of the overworked tissues on the bottom of the foot. He's going to take the ball, and right in front of the heel bone on the inside, he's going to place that ball, and he's going to start slowly digging side to side, and then he's going to work up along the big toe. And as he goes, if he finds anything that's uncomfortable, he's going to pin that spot and then just pump his big toe up and down and release those tissues. So he'd spend about 2 minutes on each side, unless he felt he couldn't get to all of the areas, and he could easily extend that. But the secret is just nice and slow, just going side to side.
There it is.
And you'll find the areas pretty quickly. And he can work his way up, and then he could slowly work that ball up to the first joint of the big toe. And along the way, if he finds a spot, he can just pump the toe up and down. And then once he finishes that side, he can work on the outer portion as well, and just work himself across the whole arch of the foot. So really important. It's something that you don't want to put yourself in a position where you're distracted with anything else. You want to try to focus on this. Try to breathe the entire time. Give yourself about 2 minutes on each side and see if you can't loosen that up. And then when you go to move after that, you should feel a significant change in the tissue quality. The feet might tingle a little bit, so now you're improving circulation, but your foot should feel lighter, should actually feel pretty good. So in cases where you absolutely have to continue, if it's an activity, if it's training, you can take any kind of stretch tapes. This is available at most sporting goods stores now, but if you have any kind of tape with elasticity, and you notice you're getting some hot spots along the front of this heel here, usually they'll stereotype it as plantar fasciitis. It might be, you also have tendons that run up through here. So it might not be the plantar fascia, but creating a brace to pull some of that tension off can take the edge off of the pain and just creates a sling to support the foot. So he has a little higher of an arch than typically what you'll see when the feet collapse, but 1 to 2 of these can take the edge off, but you still want to do the adjunct treatment, the lacrosse ball, and the loading exercises. All right, guys, so now that we've worked on some of the areas we commonly will find are overworked, overstressed, we have to retrain those tissues so that now that they can actually adapt to the stress that we need them to. And when we look at the foot, again, if you have these toe inserts. You can wear these during the exercises. Specifically for the plantar fascia type exercises, these help a lot. If he was wearing these, he could easily start to engage those toes a little bit more. What I want to focus on is having him keep his feet straight, and he's gonna let his feet collapse. So he's gonna start in a collapsed position, and all he's doing is twisting his lower body. So his lower leg will collapse in, and then he's just gonna rotate out without letting the feet move, without letting the feet rotate. And as he rotates out, because his foot's on the ground, he's training that posterior tib muscle, those inside leg muscles to fire. And what you'll notice is if you do this right, you have to keep the knee straight, but you'll actually feel the hip working as well. So you stay completely vertical, but it's a good hip exercise because you're training hip rotation, which is critical for running. He's not going crazy far. He's not trying to twist his knee past the point where he feels pain. But as he gets into reps 20, 25, 30, he'll start to feel some fatigue through the inside of his leg. So really good exercise to start implementing. And for somebody that say has this type of pain when they run, it might also be a good idea to invest in some kind of semi-rigid insert. So Superfeet, some of these brands that make slight arch support will allow the foot from overstretching and collapsing too much when you have to run. But wearing those during this exercise isn't necessary. It's just when you're actually running. And leading into running, so you talk about running volume, you could have somebody that has the perfect form, landing midfoot, but if they're not hitting somewhere in the 180 steps per minute, that impact is high. So you're spending more time on the ground, you're actually losing and wasting energy. Most apps and most devices will give you the option to download or play like a BPM, so 180. And what you try to work on is keeping up that pace. And that's been proven to help with decreasing the impact and the stress to those tissues. So for running specifically, try to maintain somewhere in that cadence. But in terms of supporting his running, this is a great exercise to take away some of that discomfort. Say he did have active pain and he wasn't able to run, this is where holding that position, if he held that position for 30 to 40 seconds and just let the blood flow work into those areas, it should start to feel better. It'll warm up and it'll actually feel better. And he could do the same thing with the plantar fascia pain. If he has pain on the back underside of the foot, wearing his inserts, he could stand, turn the feet slightly in and do a mid-range calf raise. And just by holding that position with the toes splayed, he could hold 30, 45 seconds. So if he has pain on that spot, it should start to loosen up. If you feel like that hurts, then you just try to decrease the amount of weight. So you would use a countertop, take some pressure off of it. But over time, you should start to feel that pain subside. That pain will subside. And then the last portion would be eventually adding back in some of that plyometric kind of quick activity to 6 minutes, 8 minutes to allow your tissues to fully acclimate to the activity of impact or running. How do you apply this into your training? So one of the biggest issues we see is volume. And when it comes to running specifically, what we found is 3 times a week is plenty. If you do increase that to 4 times, you have to implement a low impact option. So you don't want to run 4 times a week. You want to actually decrease that impact by continuing to train your system, but giving your body the time to recover. So this is where you can implement, a machine of choice. Most successful programs will typically have you run 2 to 3 times. And if you do that extra 3rd or 4th, implementing with a lower impact option, and always giving yourself a day off in between. Now, that being said, if you ramp up to say 4 days of maybe like system specific for a run, your strength will drop. So you have to just kind of keep in mind, you can't keep everything firing the entire time. So if your goal is to improve your performance in a run, you're training for strength, full body strength twice a week, that should be plenty.
Incidentally, that is exactly in line with how we program at SOFLETE. So
uncanny.
It's not a coincidence that when you apply scientific programming rules, most of the experts agree that certain things should be done certain ways. Hey, if you guys found this content helpful and you want to get more like it, click subscribe and ring the bell. We're going to have Theo on as a regular guest to go over a whole bunch of stuff. If you look in the description, you'll find a link to his manual that is some self-help, self-guided ways to do preventative protocols and take care of your body as your volume turns up. And we have a lot of great content over at SOFLETE.com.